NightMerica is an independently produced podcast. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/NightMerica. And please tell your friends about us.
Welcome to NightMerica, a podcast that takes you on a tour of the abnormal, paranormal, weirdly true, and truly weird in every corner across this nation. Because, to paraphrase Ray Parker Jr., whether it's ghosts, aliens, monsters, or monstrous humans, there's something strange in your neighborhoods. Episode 19, Killer and Creepy Campsites. I'm Aaron Sagers, your co-host from Paranormal Caught on Camera, Paranormal Paparazzi, Paranormal Lockdown, Evidence It Revealed. I think that was the name of it. I don't know. I forget the names sometimes of the things I was on. It's been a lot of paranormal things. Anyhow, Aaron Sagers.
I often forget the name of TV shows that I'm on, too.
Joined, as always, by my co-host, Britt.
Well, I'm so awkward at jumping in.
You are.
But you hold long pauses.
It's a setup. It's like slight dramatic pause, pregnant pause. It's from the William Shatner school of talking. Sometimes
that's what's
to punctuate
interesting.
Something you have to let it linger in the air.
Oh my god, I'm talking. Stop talking.
It worked for William Shatner. All I'm saying, worked for William Shatner.
We just have a very different approach to talking. Like, I come from the retail world. Well, you gotta say it fast, you gotta be quick. So, like, I'm no bullshit. But you love space.
Well, I would also say that the retail presentation is a little bit different than a podcast where you're supposed to be entertaining people.
Retail is entertaining. Hello, it's totally improv.
Maybe improv. Is that the same as entertaining?
It's all yes and. Totally. We're putting on a show for people. They're buying into us. Oh my god, if you think sales is not acting,
I didn't say that.
You've never worked in sales.
I didn't say that. I have worked in sales, and I wouldn't say that. But I wouldn't say that it's entertaining. Acting is not necessarily entertaining.
I would beg to differ.
Entertaining suggests that your mission is to sell. Your mission is not to sell a story. Your mission is not to maybe sell the story behind a brand, behind a product to make people want to buy into that.
Exactly.
Right. But and I would definitely say that it's improv and you have to think on your feet. But I would not say it's entertainment.
Okay, I mean, I guess that's true. It's not like people, well, I would, but it's not like people turn on Bravo and watch, like, the Real Shop Girls of New York City. But that would be fantastic television.
Yeah, and then suddenly that would be entertainment, and once it was entertainment, it would no longer be reality. It's the same thing with, I don't know, paranormal investigations or journalists on TV, you know? Like, it's, if you're presenting reality, reality can be entertaining, but, you know, in of itself, I don't think it's not like when you go to work and someone walks in, you're not ultimately trying to entertain them. You're not working for applause. They're not paying to come into your store.
I'm working for them to pull out their cash money.
Right, exactly. So if it was entertainment, then just simply listening to your story would be a job well done.
Do you think stripping is entertainment?
Yes. Do you not?
No, but I also think that retail can be entertainment.
Stripping is also sales, but
see, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's like the combination. That's where the worlds collide.
Okay, so you're saying retail is like stripping. I think there's plenty of people in
We're not even 5 minutes in and we haven't even touched on anything.
There's plenty of people in retail and people in the stripping industry, I think both would take umbrage at that Strippers work hard too, by the way. They dance.
Oh, please. Strippers work harder than me.
Okay.
Have no trouble admitting that.
So, and I mean, that is entertainment. They have to learn a number. They have to, memorize, probably memorize.
And they're ripped. They're so strong.
They are. We could do a whole episode on strip clubs. This is
great.
This is actually something that I don't know how much I can talk about it, but something that I have researched for a work project about potential strip clubs that have haunted activity.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's also bordellos and whatnot. Anyhow,
this is NightMerica.
Episode 19: Killer and Creepy Campsites. But first, the news. What newsy item do you have this week?
Well, I got to give a big shout out of love to our listeners who heard my cry that there's no weird news in the world, and they hit me up on social media sharing all sorts of stories. So thank you. You know who you are. You're awesome.
So you cheated, basically.
Well, you didn't even let me finish.
Okay, go on. Sorry, you're right. But I am calling you a cheater.
They came to me with the Tiger King news. They came to me with that Loch Ness photo, Naya Rivera. But I decided to go with something else, something nice and light, because my story's kind of heavy today.
Okay. Are you going to do that, or are you going to use a long pause?
I used a long pause for you. So, Cody Timms received a voter registration application in the mail last Friday. And now that alone does not make weird news, except for the fact that he had been dead for 12 years. And he was a cat. The letter didn't come from the Secretary of State. It came from a third-party political group, so no voter fraud was committed, or Froder fraud was what I was about to say. But Carol Timms, who is Cody's owner, did confirm to the AP News that he was in fact a demo cat.
Yeah, I see what you did there.
That hit my funny bone so hard.
Yeah, definitely some low hanging fruit.
I love low hanging animal puns. So that was my story. Demo cat gets voter registration.
Right, I get it. It's like a Democrat, except it's a demo cat.
Cat.
Yeah, that's.
Jokes are best explained.
I guess that's otherwise he would have been a Republican. I don't know.
That's good. That's good.
Working, I'm doing improv. Yes, and.
Yes, and.
So okay, well that's interesting. Good to know that.
Yes, and what's your story?
R.I.P. to, what was his name? Frodo?
Cody.
Similar. I don't know where I got Frodo from. In my mind, it was Frodo Timms, which would be a good cat name as well. Anyhow.
That is a good cat name.
My news article this week comes from, paranormalpopculture.com. That's my website, so I can do it. I can pull from my own website.
Hell yeah, you can.
But, so, yes, I appear on Paranormal Caught on Camera on Travel Channel, and Paranormal Caught on Camera is produced by Meeting House Productions. And that's interesting because Meeting House Productions is now doing another show called The Osbournes Want to Believe. This is coming up on the Travel Channel. And so in the 90s, well, I guess early 2000s, the Osbournes had their MTV show with Ozzy, Sharon.
Oh, it was so good.
Jack, Kelly. Well,
yeah.
That ended in 2005. And since then, Jack Osbourne has really established himself as a face and name in the paranormal world. He's done a show called Haunted Highway that was on Sci-Fi.
He did Portals to Hell.
He does. He continues to do Portals to Hell, yeah.
I watched one episode.
Yes. And it was maybe an episode I was on. But we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
Because I don't love that
no,
episode.
No, it wasn't.
Oh. That's all right. I don't.
No, I have seen it. I just thought it would be funny if I said that I watched an episode of the show, but it wasn't the one you were on.
You're so tricky. You're such a tricksy Brit today. And then he also did Ozzy and Jack's World Tour, which was not a paranormal show, but they did visit Roswell, New Mexico, and some haunted locations. Anyhow, so this new show that's coming up, well, as we record this, it's coming up on August 2nd, 2020. It's supposedly Ozzy and Sharon are somewhat skeptical, and Jack shows them videos and tries to convince them of the validity of the paranormal. So it looks a little bit like sort of this movie theater setup. I'm sure it's in their homes. I'm sure it's probably recorded during quarantine time. And it definitely looks entertaining. I mean, you can't deny the fact that Ozzy and Sharon and Jack all together are quite entertaining. Oh, I don't know if Kelly is going to be. I don't think she's going to be part of it, but maybe she'll pop in.
That'd be great.
Doesn't she?
I really like that Sharon is letting her hair go natural now.
Oh, yeah?
She looks so stunning.
Okay. I didn't know that. But, and the other thing is that, so this show is sort of based on, well, they call the Osbournes the first family of darkness, which I don't really think that they're all that dark. But they also kind of go off on detours and talk about other things like Harry and the Hendersons, which is a great movie with a Bigfoot in it, a Sasquatch. But, so, it should be a fun little show. It'll be interesting to see what happens, and happy for the folks over at Meeting House for putting this show together.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Looks good. I saw the ad for it watching Paranormal last night.
Yes. Very good. Well.
And posting terrible pictures of you. In case anyone follows us on Twitter, you're welcome.
Yeah. I appreciate your dedication to finding awkward photos of me. Anywho, let's dive into our topic. Actually, before we dive into our topic, we're going to talk about campsites, but have you ever camped? Ever?
Yes. And it was tragic. When I was in maybe like 5th grade, it was before we moved to America, I was home for the summer and signed up for Girl Scout camp because my best friend at the time that lived in America was really into Girl Scouts. I think she did it all through high school. And so I joined her to go to Girl Scout camp. Okay, first of all, why? I barely go outdoors. I'm sure you can tell from this podcast, like, I am an indoor cat all the way. And so now I go to this camp with a bunch of Girl Scouts. Okay, I've never really done Girl Scouts. My mom and I bailed because it was like too woodsy. And the bathroom just had a toilet with a hole straight through to the ground. And I'm like, oh, hell no. So I don't think I pooped for like 4 days because I was so creeped out. And then the next morning, I wake up and there was a girl sleeping in the cabin next to me, and she had a giant spider on her face.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And I called my parents and I was like, get me out of here. And my dad came and picked me up. I only had like 2 days left, I think, but I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And we stopped at a McDonald's on the way home, and I think that was the longest pee I ever had in my life.
Did you poop at the McDonald's too?
Probably. Because that toilet terrified me.
Yeah. That's how it is in other parts of the world. There is sometimes not even a toilet. It's just a hole in the ground.
Oh, I count my blessings every day.
It's, I mean, there's just different ways. That's what camping is. And you slept in a cabin. You weren't even in a tent.
I mean, it was like a tenty fabric on top with like a floor. And then we had cots.
And a door?
Honestly, the cots were probably... Yeah, there was a door.
Yeah, that's not a tent.
I'm not an outdoorsy person, okay?
I just want to say, I'm not casting aspersions on your upbringing or whatever, but I'm pretty certain if had I been a child and said, I'm camping and now I don't want to camp. I don't know. Maybe my mom would have wanted to pull me out of that, but my father would have wanted me to just like suck it up and persist. And that's, I do
Oh,
think...
my dad did.
I think
my
that's what
dad
you should
wanted
do.
me to.
Yeah.
No. My mom was like, hell no, get her out of here. My mom's my best friend.
How do you
She's
develop
the best.
coping skills then?
I have other coping skills. I don't need to camp.
Well, I know, but just putting up with difficult situations, like...
There wasn't a flushing toilet.
But
I don't need to put up with that.
There was a hole in the ground, just saying. So why did we get on this topic? Man, this is a rambling podcast already. Why did we get into this topic of campsites? Why did we choose this one? Did I choose this one?
I think we both kind of agreed on it because it's summer. This is like when people camp.
Yeah. Well, I do love camping. And I do like being out in the wilderness. And it's also pretty creepy time because you're surrounded by nature. You feel vulnerable. Maybe you don't have a flushing toilet. That's scary for some people, named Britt. And sometimes it's just that you're out in the woods and you are in this tent, this thin piece of fabric, and you hear nature happening around you, walking around outside. Maybe you're removed from civilization, so who knows what bad people are out there in the woods, or even like forest people living in the woods, and your senses are heightened, and it's very dark out. I remember one time camping, it was so dark, especially this one time, so dark that you just couldn't see, even in front of your hand, in front of your face. There's this other time that I was camping in the Boy Scouts and heard something. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't think it was a bear, but to this day, I heard something traipsing around my tent in the middle of the night. Very large. It's very scary and but also awesome. Who knows? Maybe a Sasquatch. Or maybe another person. I was
just going to say, maybe it was a Sasquatch.
Maybe. I have heard Sasquatch calls in the forest, or something that sounds like what they say Sasquatch calls sound like.
Can you do this call for me? What does it sound like?
I could, but I'm not going to. Especially, I think it would blow out the audio on this podcast.
Okay.
But you can look it up. But anyhow, so yeah, you feel vulnerable. So I think, and it's a great summer activity. So this is sort of where we delved into this. So let's get into it after a word from our first sponsor. Okay, well, we are back, and
better than ever.
Better than we were like 30 seconds ago?
Yeah.
You're also ruining the magic of the podcast by letting people know that we weren't just reading that ad fresh.
I mean, I'm sure they probably can tell.
Well, now they know.
Sorry, guys.
Stagecraft. And, I mean, you should know what that is since you work in entertainment.
I'm all about honesty, man.
All about the razzmatazz. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your story?
Well, I'll start by giving a little background. Probably my second favorite horror movie ever is The Strangers. And have I made you watch it with me?
No, but I've seen The Strangers. It is rightly a very terrifying movie.
Oh, it's so good. It came out in 2008. The Strangers Prey After Dark or whatever, the second one was not as good, but it did come out recently. It's worth a watch. Anyway, if you haven't seen The Strangers, watch it. Second favorite horror movie. It's directed by Brian Bertino, and it was inspired by 3 different stories. One is Sharon Tate's murder, of course, by the Manson family. 2 is actually some crimes that happened in his neighborhood growing up, some break-ins. And then the 3rd is the story that I'm doing today called the Keddie Cabin Murders. Have you heard of them?
Not based on that title, but dive in.
Great.
Maybe I'll know it.
You're
excited.
in for a ride. Let's start by building an emotional attachment to these victims. It's a late 1980, and Glenna Susan Sharp, she goes by Sue, has decided to separate from her husband James Sharp. and move her children from Connecticut across the country to California, where her brother lives. He lives in a super rural part of the Sierra Nevadas called Keddie. So Sue rents a cabin at the Keddie Resort to get her kids kind of settled in. So the Sharp kids, there's a lot of them. Are you ready? John is 15, Sheila is 14, Tina is 12, Rick is 10, and Greg is 5. Holy cow. That had to be tough as a single parent. Times are also super tough financially. Like, you hear that they're staying at a cabin at a resort, but it was not easy. Susan got a $250 check from the Navy as her estranged husband was a veteran. She also got money from a federal education program that she was a part of, and they survived on food stamps, so it was not smooth sailing. But they move into cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort, and they just absolutely fall in love with it. The kids want for nothing. They play in the pond. They play in the forest that's right there. They just really love this rural life. So this now brings us to April 11, 1981. The family has been there for a couple of months now, and they're super active. It's a typical Tuesday for them, so the kids are all out and about. Sheila, she is the oldest daughter, but the second oldest kid, plans a sleepover at her friend's house that night. Justin Smart, who is a neighbor from cabin 26, came over to have a sleepover with Rick and John. And then they also had a friend named Dana come and sleep over too. So these boys were all there hanging out. We know that Sheila left home for her sleepover around 8 p.m. And then the daughter Tina left her friend's house to head back home around 9:30 p.m., just to kind of set up the time. So it's now 10 p.m. Who is in the house? Sue the mom, John and his friend Dana, Tina, Rick and his friend Justin, and Greg. So Sheila wakes up early from her sleepover and decides to go back to the cabin around 7:45 a.m., also super early to wake up from a sleepover, just saying. But anyway, gets home 7:45 a.m. and opens the door to probably the worst moment of her life. She first sees her older brother John bound and lying on his back in the living room, caked with blood. Bound at his feet, they were bound together, was his friend Dana. He also had his hands tied behind his back, but he was laying face down. She then runs back to her friend's cabin where she was staying. They're called the Seabolt family, screaming for help. This dad, thank God, comes running back with her, walking the perimeter of the house to make sure that no one is there or no one is around. And believe it or not, goes to the back window and finds the boys alive in the back bedroom and pulls them out of the safety. These are the boys that were alive. John, as I said, and Dana are deceased. So the police come and enter the home, finding the two deceased boys, as Sheila did, but they also find Sue on the sofa. She was gagged naked from the waist down and had been stabbed in the chest. What's also super interesting to me is that on her head, she had been hit in the head with the butt of a Daisy 88 BB gun, which feels like a weird, I mean, I don't know guns, but like I hear a BB gun and I think it's like, Ralphie, you'll shoot your eye out. Like, I don't feel like that's the kind of weapon you bring to a crime scene.
I mean, the BB guns we had when I was a kid, like my brothers would shoot one another with, so from across the yard. I mean, they can puncture the skin and be quite painful.
All right. And, well, thank you for the gun lesson.
Well, you know, I mean, they're still weapons. They can still do damage and, you know, kill animals and things like that.
Interesting. Well, it wasn't found on site, but the imprint of the gun was clear on her head. They also find a steak knife that had been bent in half in the blade from force. And then they also find a blood-covered hammer. So the neighbors, including Sheila, who was sleeping over a few cabins over, didn't hear anything. One neighbor claimed to wake up to a scream around 1:30 in the morning, but went back to sleep. And then some claimed to see a green truck or a brown Datsun outside of the house around 9 p.m., which was like unusual, but I mean, you know, they're just random cars. It wasn't like they were going to call the cops. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, but it's also the 80s and in the woods, so I feel like people may not necessarily lock their windows and doors at this point. And there was a bloody fingerprint on the back door. And the lead investigator said whoever committed the crime must have left covered in blood just because of how gruesome this crime scene was. Well, if you were listening to me earlier, you would have noticed that there's something that I have not mentioned, and that's that the boys were found alive. The two children and Sue are dead. Sheila was at her friend's house, but where is Tina, the one daughter? So Sheila can't find her. She's nowhere in the house. She's not around. And so she is like frantically telling the police that her sister is missing. And they don't listen to Sheila until hours later when they figure it out for themselves, assholes. And it's super frustrating because they could have put out an APB alert to other people to like look out for this girl. Maybe, you know, they could have seen something, but they didn't until they figured it out for themselves. So who did this? The immediate suspect is the next door neighbor, and it happens to be Justin's stepdad, Martin Smart. Justin Smart was the kid who was sleeping over that night and was one of the three boys found alive. So interesting that he was found alive, and they think, you know, maybe his dad did it. The night of the murders, Martin Smart's friend, John Bubetti, I think is how you pronounce it. He goes by Bo. He was staying over that night. And while they were being interviewed by the police for alibis, their stories were filled with lies and contradictions. For example, Bo lied about his birth date. He told the police that Martin's wife was actually his niece and that he was a retired police officer shot in the line of duty. These were all lies. They all so easily could have been fact-checked by police, but they didn't. Martin, during his police interview, said that his stepson might have seen something that night without me detecting him. What?
Wait, that's confusing.
Yeah. I think he means that Justin might have seen who committed the crime without Martin detecting that he witnessed it, which puts Martin himself at the scene of the crime.
Okay, that's a direct quote from him?
Yes, it's a direct quote in the police interview.
Awkward.
Like, it's on tape. Yep. I think it's super suspicious that it happened to be the night his son was staying over and his son is safe. However, Martin's wife, Marilyn, gotta love her, completely threw him under the bus, saying she separated with him right after these crimes because he became violent. She told police that he and Bo had asked Sue to go to the bar with them that night, and she declined because she had all these kids in the house. She wasn't going to go out for a drink. And that Martin had, or in the house they had, found a bloody jacket that belonged to Tina in their basement, and a hammer was missing from their toolbox, and the hammer was one of the weapons they found on site. So what did police do? They bring Martin in for a polygraph, and he passes. So shoot, he must not have done it then. He moves to Reno, Nevada, and he writes a letter to Marilyn in his own handwriting, stamped from Reno, and it says, and I quote, "I've paid the price for your love, And now I've bought it with 4 people's lives. You tell me you're through? Great. What else do you want? I mean, he's basically admitting to it there.
Yeah.
So Marilyn, his wife, sends it to the police because she's like, oh my God, here's like a written confession in his handwriting stamped where he lives. And the police ignore it because, gosh darn it, he passed the polygraph. So clearly that means he's innocent. Or was it because he happened to be friends with then Sheriff Doug Thomas, who he actually lived with for a bit when he separated with his wife? It's true. So 3 years later, Tina's remains are found in Butte County, which is like 100 miles away from the crime scene. And what's interesting is that in 2013, a new sheriff was put in charge of this case. And he was actually 16 at the time of the crime and knew the Sharps. He knew this family that had been brutally murdered. And while digging into evidence, all the sealed evidence from the case, he found a tape that had been called into 911 of someone anonymously calling in to say that Tina's remains would be found there. So they knew, they had this tape the whole time, but they didn't go to look for Tina's remains. She was randomly found 3 years later.
Well,
as this was never investigated, I think it's kind of safe to say that it was a cover-up for a cop's BFF. The new sheriff said, and this is a quote he told a local newspaper, an article by Victoria Metcalf, which I'll link. It's really well written. He said, "This case is as screwed up as a soup sandwich. It's not about what was done, but what was not done." And that's Sheriff Gamberg, who was a kid at the same time as the families and knew them. Bo died in 1988. Marty died in 2006, but the new sheriff isn't giving up because he thinks, it was in the 80s. It wasn't like it was all that long ago. There have to be more people that know what happened, or maybe someone else that they can connect it with. There is DNA. I mean, at the time they didn't really know what DNA was, but there is DNA that they've recovered from some of these weapons. So they're hoping maybe like through ancestral DNA, they can connect this to, who the actual killer was. But it's one of my favorite stories. I think it's why people shouldn't go camping, because it's dangerous. These cabins, these resort places.
Well, there's plenty of people that don't get murdered when camping. It certainly sounds like a miscarriage of justice.
And that's the Keddie Cabin murders.
It's definitely disturbing and
super disturbing.
So, where are you putting the motive? What would you say is the motive?
That's what's tricky. There are a lot of things on the internet that talk about how...
And we have to use the word alleged because these guys were never...
Exactly. They've never been caught.
Convicted, caught, charged, anything. So...
Exactly. And nothing was missing from the house, so it wasn't like it was robbery. This family had no money, so it's not like they could have been really robbed anyway. There were things on the internet that talked about how much Marty hated John, the oldest son. It didn't say why exactly, but that was reported. That they had also asked Sue to go out, and she said no. Both of these men were veterans, so maybe they had some sort of PTSD that could have been triggered by something. I don't know. That feels kind of like a stretch because there's people that survive with PTSD and are perfectly harmless people every day. But I don't know. It's very sketchy.
Well, I can see why this would be one of the stories that potentially or did inspire the strangers, based on the senselessness and the violence of that movie and of this crime.
Yeah. And if it was random, like the strangers, it's totally random.
Well, that's dark.
Dark.
So
That's why I talked about my Demacat for weird news.
yeah, can we go back to another cat story before we get into? No, we'll just hear from another sponsor, and then we'll come back with something less dark. I mean, I would say that the story that I'm going to tell is definitely not as intense, definitely spooky. I love the idea of gathering around the campfire and telling spooky stories. That's definitely something I've done, something that in many ways we continue to do through, I would host these Zoom story times during the pandemic, during the quarantine, and it was essentially that. It was like a paranormal, a virtual campfire, sitting around the campfire and telling spooky stories. But
I love it.
I do too. I love it. It's definitely I have fond memories of it from childhood, and the Boy Scouts and things like that. And I was a Boy Scout. But the site that I'm going to talk about is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it is the Holy Ghost Campground. Now, right away with the name Holy Ghost Campground, certainly sounds like it's going to be set up for a spooky situation. It is worth mentioning that there's a lot of, if you look it up, there's a lot of supposedly haunted campgrounds out there. This one, I think, comes up one of the most, especially in the U.S. It's situated in this steep canyon alongside Holy Ghost Creek. Really gorgeous area. It's something like 16 miles north of the Pecos Mountains. And sadly for you, Brett, well, there are toilets. I don't know whether or not they flush, but so it is a place that you could somewhat cheat with your camping. You could drive stuff in there, but there's no electrical hookups and things like that for people that, no, for anyone that you couldn't have like a sewer or an RV or whatever, I don't think. Anyhow, it's a really gorgeous area. But why are we talking about it today? Well, first off, the stories of supposed paranormal activity goes back to the 1700s here. A Catholic priest, allegedly, it's hard to really pin down the facts on this, was allegedly attacked by the Pueblo people who it was said were defending themselves from colonizers, which I'm all about. I don't want to advocate murder of anyone, but the colonizers didn't bring nothing but trouble for the indigenous peoples. So if a priest came trying to force their religion on him, sorry, you got to go. Anyhow, some of the more recent stories, though, are of supposed car crashes and biker brawls and just a lot of activity that takes place in this location that leads to all sorts of haunted activity. Amongst those activity includes mysterious lights in the trees, orbs hovering in the distance, strange sounds at night. Now, this got me thinking, well, that doesn't sound entirely like ghosts. That could be something else in this Santa Fe National Forest. Well, turns out there are some stories connected to that. And I want to give a shout out to Outside Magazine, again, outsideonline.com. This is the second time I'm attributing something to them. I was familiar with a lot of the Holy Ghost stories, but they had some interesting details on their website in an article by Taylor Gee, unless it's Taylor G, I don't know. But sorry, Taylor, however you pronounce your last name. But so Taylor spoke to a guide in that area, Alan Pacheco. Again, I could be butchering his poor name. Sorry, Alan. And he said there's been a number of people who have gone missing in the vicinity. So this suddenly gets strange. It's like a Bermuda Triangle of New Mexico, and supposedly people just disappear into thin air. No clothing, no bones, nothing is found. So that's odd. But there's also possible UFO activity there. This reminds me of the Skinwalker Ranch. It's one of these locations where there's just a lot of things happening, layers upon layers of paranormal activity taking place. So supposedly UFOs have been spotted in the area as well. But so add to that is supposedly sightings of shadow people in the area as well. So this and voices. There's a lot of audio voice phenomena that people are hearing these voices. So of course this is all speculation, but at least Alan Pacheco says that he believes that there's a cosmic doorway that opens up there. Some sort of dimensional wormhole. Different energies, different beings. Now this is a really interesting thought, because I think maybe some people in the mainstream who are not big paranormal heads would say, well, that just sounds ridiculous. But that is definitely a very strong theory, and something that's very much connected to certain Bigfoot theories, that Bigfoot is an interdimensional being, and that there's some reason, I think we even talked a little bit about it when we were talking about the Mothman and Point Pleasant, that when there's this convergence of activity, there seems to be a theory of interdimensionality to it, and some sort of crossover with our world and other worlds. Now, of course, the Santa Fe National Forest denies any kind of paranormal activity. But, which I think they're missing an opportunity here, because ghosts bring in business. So just say it's spooky,
Totes.
and a lot more people are gonna be coming there. Maybe they don't want a lot more people coming there, but a lot more people would be going there if you just said there was paranormal activity. But instead, the official line is ghosts are not real, and that's why it can't be haunted.
It's bold of them to say ghosts are not real.
Well, the actual quote from the Santa Fe National Forest is, quote, "Holy Ghost Campground cannot be haunted for one simple yet big and important reason: ghosts are not real." Which
Whoa.
I think is awfully dismissive. But here is something
super dismissive.
Here is something that I think is just sort of the capper on this somewhat brief story. But so the reason I pulled from Outside Magazine, so they listed some of their favorite supposedly haunted campgrounds. Well, as it happens, Outside Magazine, some of the staff there actually went and camped out in the Holy Ghost Campground. And I'm going to quote directly from them. And this article was published October 2019. Okay? So, direct quote here. On Friday, October 18th, after this story was published, a group of outside editors bravely spent the night at Holy Ghost to investigate the claims of paranormal activity. The night passed peacefully, but the next morning, associate managing editor Alida Berchiski got up early to fish the nearby Holy Ghost Creek. About 10 minutes in, her hook got snagged on a root along the bank. As Berchiski worked to free the hook, she saw a dark figure in her peripheral vision. It was approaching her. She says, quote, "He was walking weird, kind of loping. Initially, she thought it was her husband coming over to tell her how cold he was, walking strangely in an attempt to warm up. Quote, but then I turned to say hi," she says, "and nobody was there." Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
So that is the tale of the Holy Ghost Campground in New Mexico. It's, again, like, it's one of these that I've heard of. I don't have specific stories associated with it outside of some of the generic phenomena that I've heard of here and listed here. But it's well known enough that it's kind of bubbled up into my channels. But I think it's definitely kind of an interesting one. There's so many of them out there, and there's even a lot of inspiration for things like Friday the 13th. There's actually a Camp Crystal Lake that is supposedly haunted, things like that. So I would just say that when you go camping out there, bring a flashlight, bring extra batteries for your flashlight, and maybe sleep with one eye open.
And bring bear spray and bring a rape whistle and like bring a phone.
Yeah, those
I
are
mean,
all
there's a lot of stuff you got to bring.
those are all fair too. Those are all fairly compact though. So,
Yeah.
and maybe bring a camping buddy. So, don't
Yes.
camp alone.
Don't camp alone. Don't do anything alone.
Not even poop in the hole in the ground
Well,
at Britt's cabin in
true.
the woods.
True.
So that's our haunted campgrounds. Love to hear some of the great. Actually, I think we should definitely encourage people out there. If there's ever a ghost story or a camping story that you told around the campfire, I would love to hear it, because they are typically regional. They're highly tailored and customized to a location and down to the campground itself. I love hearing about those, because those become part of lore and then bubble up into myths that spread across borders. Those things are great. So I'd love to hear those. But in the
That would
meantime,
make a great Patreon.
it could be a good Patreon. So let's move into some paranormal pop culture for the week, and then we'll get out of here. What are you into?
Well, I think I'm probably the last person on earth to hear about this new podcast, or like new-ish. It started last year. But Radio Rental by Payne Lindsay and hosted by Rainn Wilson under his character Terry Carnation is possibly like one of the best podcasts I have ever listened to in my entire life. The first episode I listened to was, I don't remember what number, but it was one woman story. She was in Phoenix and someone creepy came to her window. I won't say anything else. I won't ruin it. You gotta listen. And then the second story is a guy in the Upper West Side of New York who had a weird experience with his girlfriend. So they're told by the people who experienced it. It's so well done. If you haven't listened, which most people probably have, but if you haven't, downloaded it like immediately as soon as we finish.
Awesome.
And that's mine.
I will download. I'll check.
What's yours?
I've had the fortune of interviewing Rainn Wilson on a few occasions, and he's a delightful guy and hilarious. So
yeah,
that definitely.
You haven't listened to this?
No, I haven't. I will
oh
definitely
my God.
check it out.
You will love it.
I hope I do, based on that recommendation. I'm excited. Well, mine actually it's a bit of an anniversary, but it's something that I'm into.
Is it our anniversary?
No. That would not be. That might be paranormal. That would not be pop culture. It would definitely be weird. And no, but especially no, because I'm talking about something that existed before you were born. In 1990, 30 years ago, what movie premiered this week? 1990. Take a guess. Like literally, I think on the day that we're recording this, 30 years ago.
Indiana Jones?
No. But I appreciate that effort. No, the movie Ghost, starring Demi Moore, Patrick Swayze, and
Patrick Swayze looking so handsome.
And of course Whoopi Goldberg. Now, what I really want to talk about, and this movie became, because of the pottery sex scene, became something that was spoofed, but the movie itself, first off, it made bonkers amount of money, and it also it's a good movie. There's actually a lot of thriller elements, in addition to sort of the sexy romantic elements. There's a lot of thriller elements. There's a bit of a whodunit element to it. But within all that, and of course it's about a Wall Street banker played by Patrick Swayze. He's deeply in love with his girlfriend Molly. His name's Sam. He's deeply in love with his girlfriend Molly, played by Demi Moore. They're remodeling their new apartment. And then Sam ends up dead in what seems like a typical mugging gone wrong, which is sort of like a Batman origin story, where Batman's parents got murdered in Crime Alley. But anyhow, so Sam in the movie, he he dies on the street, but he ignores his light. He doesn't go into the light. So he ignores his kind of opening to heaven and instead wants to solve his own murder, but also wants to obviously be with the woman he loves. Now, this movie, so thriller elements, romantic elements, a lot of things happening, but there's also these paranormal and supernatural elements which are surprisingly in line with paranormal theory. You have the medium, Oda Mae Brown, played by Whoopi Goldberg, and there's this famous scene of her seance room, her parlor, is surrounded by all these spirits that are trying to like clamor for attention, and they jump in her, trying to talk to their relatives who are still earthbound. You have, which is very similar to sort of what I've heard from actual mediums, some of the things that they experience, like there's so many people chirping in their ear. You have this notion of these kind of shadow people. You have sort of this white light and this dark energy. There's this great subway scene where there's this angry ghost just knocking things around in the subway. It's, I believe, set in New York City. It's set in New York City. This angry ghost that's like knocking things around, and he's just really pissed off. And Patrick Swayze's character, is eventually like pushed around by the guy, but then goes to him and says like, "Teach me your ways. How do you actually manipulate physical objects? How do you do this?" And he teaches him how to focus his energy and actually manipulate objects. The character actor's name was Vincent Schiavelli, who is really notable for people who've seen a lot of crime movies and whatnot. He's a recognizable character actor. But there's all these things that are really in line with paranormal theories. So that's really why it holds up and why it's worth going back and watching it again. And there's one other reason I will say that's worth watching. Have you seen it?
I'm embarrassed to admit that I have not.
Don't be embarrassed.
But that's not a surprise because I haven't seen like any movie.
I don't judge you. You don't need to be embarrassed. But the other thing,
I've seen like Halloween and The Strangers, and that's it.
That's it. Well, the other element to this, which is just sort of funny, and I had totally forgotten about this. So the movie was directed by Jerry Zucker, and he was the movie was nominated for a Best Picture. Ghost was. Jerry Zucker, aside from Ghost, is best known for movies like Airplane and Top Secret, and I believe even the Naked Gun movies. He was a producer on it and a writer. Kentucky Fried Movie. So all of these spoof movies. I think Ghost was the only movie that was, well, one of two movies that he was involved in that was sort of a serious movie. So it's just sort of random that the guy behind Naked Gun and Airplane ended up directing this insanely successful movie that ended up getting these Oscar nominations and ended up having all these weird paranormal theories to it. So anyhow, that's what I'm talking about in my paranormal pop culture today, is Ghost, 1990. Happy anniversary. 30 years old. And thank you for bringing us...
anniversary.
Thank you for bringing us, pottery sex. And popularizing, for modern audiences, the Righteous Brothers song, Unchained Melody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was huge. That was like a big kind of... the song was from 1955, and then suddenly it was on the charts again because of this movie. It's just weird. It was all around.
Yeah.
So there you go. And I think my mom
I think
my mom really liked the movie too. So
I mean, how can you not like Patrick Swayze?
Well, the thing about Patrick Swayze, his characters. I love the movie Roadhouse, by the way. Roadhouse is a great movie. But his characters, he was this tough guy, but his character's point of view was always to be providing love and support for the woman he was with. It wasn't about machismo. It was about this approachable but understanding sexuality. It was Patrick Swayze was way ahead of his time with his characters. So I would say yes, he was definitely
he's a class act,
sexy man. Yeah, like he had swagger. He like that like self assurance, that very like, instead of like rage, it was kind of like this, imagine like he was not like a brute force kind of hero. He was instead like sort of a feminine action hero.
Yeah. My mom is going to love the end of this episode. She loves Patrick Swayze.
I love Patrick. I'm sad that I never got to meet him.
He's the best.
Point Break's also great.
And Dirty Dancing, hello.
Well, I know, but yes, I know. I agree. I don't disagree with that one. But I mean, Roadhouse and Point Break.
We should, if we paid for the rights, we could end out on that song.
Yeah. And
so good. Oh my God, for the Patreon, if we saw each other, we should try to do the jump. I'll pick you up.
Okay.
You can like run at me and I'll lift you.
I don't think that's going to happen. But
no, you're lucky that there's social distancing.
We need more Patreon supporters so we can afford the rights to I Had the Time of my life. So
true. Speaking of Patreon supporters, I want to give a big shout out to two of our new Patreon supporters, Amy B and Catherine C. We really love chatting with you guys on social media, so super excited to have your support as well. And your stickers will be on the way.
Yeah, and
if you guys want to join in on the fun, you can click the link in our show notes.
Yeah, and I think they're also both Paranormal Caught on Camera fans, and I thank them for that support as well. So thank you guys for being so awesome. Well,
our listeners are the best.
They are the best. So that sounded like insincere, but I didn't mean it that way. They are literally the best. It's just my very droll and dry delivery, along with my pregnant pauses.
Oh my God, you're killing me.
Softly? Killing you softly? Well, we've had the time of our lives on this episode, so why don't we get out of here?
If you like NightMerica, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/NightMerica. And consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us a follow on social media and share this with your friends.
And if you'd like to share your paranormal stories or even seek paranormal advice, which is for entertainment purposes only, email nightmericashow@gmail.com.